everybody, and welcome to this leadership episode of 30 Minutes to President's Club. My name is Armand Farouk, and I'm here with my co-host, Nick Sigalski. And today, I think it's like round 5 or 6, and there's a reason for it. Because it is the one and only KD, Kevin Dorsey, a multiple-time sales leader of world-class organizations who has the baddest breakdowns in sales. Nick, why should people listen?
If you're watching on YouTube, I've been wiggling the whole intro, and there's a reason for that. Kevin talks about the importance of documenting what good looks like, aka wiggle. But he goes further. He talks about once you've documented what good looks like, how you actually affect change in your sales organization. And then he gave me a really big paradigm shift about looking forward versus looking back from a sales leadership perspective that I think you should listen to. And I think if you wiggle along the way, you'll get some extra exercise during this episode.
And mid-interview, look out for the hat change and a 3, 2, 1. Let's ride. All right, Katie, welcome to the show. We start every show with your top 3 actionable takeaways. Let's get your 3.
Okay, top 3 takeaways. First one, be obsessed with the wiggle. Be obsessed with the wiggle, and no, I'm not talking about a dance move. The wiggle, WGL, stands for what good looks like. You need to be obsessed with it, but you need to get it out of your head and down on paper so people actually know.
Boom. What's number 2?
Number 2 is to study greatness. So there's a quote from a book by Sean Aker, The Happiness Advantage, that has stuck with me forever, where he said, we have become with the cult of the average. We cater to the average. What's the average close rate? What's the average ACV? What's the average quota attainment? Then we cater to the average. If you want to elevate a team, you actually need to study greatness. So once I identify who's the best at something on my team, we got almost 17 different things I'm looking for to see if I can diagnose greatness, because that's actually how I can elevate an entire team. So leaders, spend as much time studying greatness as you do what's broken, and you'll be shocked at how quickly you can change a team.
2 great takeaways. Give me number 3.
Number 3 is then once you know the wiggle and you've studied greatness, how do you scale it? 4 Ds of scale. Once I know the wiggle, I got to define it, document it, demonstrate it, and deliberately practice it. We talked about practice a lot on my last episode. Now we're getting to the other layer of this, but define, document, demonstrate, and deliberately practice. It's one of the biggest differences, I think, if people step into my orgs compared to other orgs, is you can step in and you know what good looks like for disco, and you know what good looks like for follow-up, because I've followed the 4 Ds, and that's what allows me to scale it. So that's my biggest third takeaway here.
Kevin, I want to ask you about what you're actually looking for when it comes to the wiggle.
So, of course, there's prioritization, right? Not everything is equal in life. But if I believe something is impactful, we need to define what good looks like. If you, as a sales leader, believe how your reps are dressed on a call impacts the outcome of that call, then as minute as that sounds, you actually should have what good looks like defined by that, right? So to me, there's almost nothing too small that needs to be defined of what good looks like. But of course, I'm going in order of importance. It also is not static. Once we've defined what good looks like, that doesn't mean that's always what good looks like, right? We are coming back to these things often to update them.
One common mistake I see managers making when documenting the wiggle is it becomes a collection of tips. So, for example, folks will say, the key to a good discovery call, you have to sell value. Here's some of my favorite questions, set an agenda, maybe some next steps. And it's a spattering of 7 different things that are popping around in their head. What are some best practices for documenting the wiggle in a way that reps can best digest it?
So when it comes to the wiggle, it needs to be proven, not preference. And too often, that's what tips are. This is my preference. This is how I like to do it. But if I can't prove that is impactful, if I can't prove that's what has worked in the past, that doesn't belong in the wiggle, right? So it's really, if we use disco, for example, there are certain things that we know if we do or do not do in discovery will impact our ability to run that deal. Like, we know it. If I do not get them to agree to a problem in discovery, I know for a fact that's going to impact my ability to close that deal. So that's what you're looking at for the wiggle, is like, if I take this away, do I feel with full certainty this will have a negative impact on my ability to close or on my ability to book? But then also, too, this is part of our job as leaders, is to define what good looks like. Because the tips, if the difference between a tip and a tactic is the expectation of usage. A tip is, hey, try this. A tactic is, we do this. Okay. I care about the tactics of discovery, of the demo, of the follow-up, of multi-threading. There are certain tactics we know are best practice. That's what the wiggle should be. Tips sit on top of it. Personality, style sit on top of it, right? The analogy I give with the wiggle or with scripts is like wiggle's the recipe. So if I'm making a pizza, there's certain things that go into that recipe. I need dough, I need sauce, I need cheese. If I take the cheese away, it's no longer pizza. If I take the dough away, it's no longer pizza. The recipe has ingredients. Now, shoot, Nick wants some pineapple and jalapeno on there. God bless you, right? Armand, do you want pesto sauce? I want barbecue chicken. Let's go. But the moment you take away the cheese, it's no longer a pizza. You can't remove the recipe. That's what the wiggle is for me.
With this wiggle, when we're documenting what good looks like, there's two types of information. There is the tactics, the stuff that is necessary, a necessary component to have a successful discovery call, cold call, management of the pipeline, etc. And then there are things that are preferential that don't matter as much. And I'm wondering if you've seen any common things that leaders will include when they're trying to document what good looks like, but it's this stuff doesn't really matter as much.
I'll use one that always gets people riled up, like on cold calling. Filler words are something that managers love to hype on or harp on that don't actually matter as much. You know why? Because we use filler words. That's how we talk to each other. I could never once sit down with a rep and go, you know what, Nick, you would have won that, but you said like too much. That is why you lost the deal. So that's one. Another one, talk time ratio. This is a big one. I've had top performers talk 70% of the time. I've had top performers talk 50% of the time. It's what you're saying in the time that matters and what you get the customer to say that matters. Cadence and speed. I'm talking pretty fast right now. I could slow down. Could bring it here. I could go a little bit more mellow. It's what I'm saying. So there's things like that more often than not, I see leaders harp on things not to do when the wiggle is about what to. That's one. Or things that are very hard to prove. Mirroring. Mirror the prospect on the demo. Okay, Armand's got his hat on backwards, so I'm going to do that real quick. It's things like that. Damn, two hats backwards? Okay. You know what? Actually, screw y'all. We're going to have fun with this.
You got to see this on YouTube, folks. Nick just added a third hat to the mix.
Uh-oh.
Oh, God. We got a cowboy hat. Okay. Yeah. You got to see that.
This is getting real now. It's getting real. So if we look at things where it's like what to do versus what not to do, that's the difference on the wiggle. But also early in my career, I will honestly say I got too detailed. Okay, disco. 30 things. Demo, 30 things. I've narrowed it down. It's 10 to 12 things top. What are the 10 things you look for in a deal? That there are 10 things that if these are not in place, your deal is at risk. 10 things in disco, 10 things on the demo, 10 things in targeting. That was also a big learning lesson as I went too far. And so I started to prioritize, here's all the things versus like, here's the 10 things that actually matter that if we don't do, nothing else matters. I'll give a very good example for my onboarding. We'll use SDRs, for example. If I'm onboarding SDRs, guess what doesn't matter if they can't have a good phone conversation?
Uptones.
Uptones don't matter. You know what else doesn't matter? Everything. If they cannot have a good phone conversation, do I need them to know the tech stack? If they can't have a good phone conversation, does it matter if they know how to convert an opportunity? So when we plan our onboarding, it's actually structured that way of what matters first. I don't even teach you the tech stack until you've proven you can have a conversation. Then I move to your emails. Then I move to objection handling. Because if you can't have a normal conversation, the objections don't matter. So it's stack ranking these things to what matters Then you move to the next part.
So, Katie, whenever you've jumped onto a podcast, you've had a methodical way of breaking things down in steps in chronological order. Let's say that you're teaching your reps how to cold call. I know you actually just released a cold calling course recently. Talk to me about the best way to break down a concept like cold calling so that it makes sense to even the most junior rep.
It actually just follows on what I was just talking about, where I'm going in sequential order. Because if I think about the cold call framework, if I don't nail the opener, the permission doesn't matter. And then if I don't get the permission, the bucket question doesn't matter. And if I don't get the bucket question, I can't do the gap questions. And if I don't do the gap questions, I can't do the might make sense. If I don't do the might make sense, I can't get the confirmation. If I don't do the confirmation, I can't do the by the way. Almost everything is sequential. Same with closing. If I don't do disco right, I don't ask good disco, I can't create a POV. If I don't create a POV, I can't justify the ROI. If I can't justify the ROI, I can't actually connect the dots in the demo. If I don't connect the dots in the demo, I can't ask for buy-in. If I didn't get buy-in, I can't do the... So for me, it's actually very sequential. Whether it's the sales process, whereas a cold call is I'm breaking it down by segment, but I'm also breaking it down by what we're getting the prospect to do in those segments.
So, Katie, you have this whole very in-depth framework for cold calling, for discovery, other things like that. A lot of this you've found by studying the best reps, the best people at the company. Talk to me about what you're looking for when you're studying greatness.
So first, it's studying is, do you know? If I walked into many orgs right now and said, who has the highest close rate? They'd have to go find out. You should know that. You should know it. But I ask leaders all the time, it's hilarious. What's the average close rate? Maybe 50, 60% of leaders know that off the top of their head. When I ask them who has the highest close rate, crickets every single time. Who has the highest close rate? Who has the highest ACV? Who has the highest connect rate? Who has the high, like, they know revenue. They don't know the things behind it, right? So first is just knowing. Do you actually know who's the best on your team at the specific metric? Then from there, it's diagnosing why do they have that highest metric? What is it they do differently? So let's say, Armand, you're my number one for close rate. First and foremost, I'm looking at, all right, what do you say on your disco calls, your demos, your pricing, your closing? So I'm looking at 4 different key things of what you're saying. Second, I'm looking at what do you get the customer to say? So one of my favorite things to do with like my top is I'm going into your transcripts, but I'm looking at what the customer's saying. What do you get them to say in these calls? So I'm looking at that in this process. What do your emails look like? What do your proposals look like? Who are you booking with? Is it a certain industry, a certain title, a certain size? Are you getting different types of leads? Are you getting a lot of referrals? Are you getting a lot of inbound, a lot of outbound? How many touches do you make? How far are you scheduling things, right? How do you run your day? So I'm looking at all of these things to diagnose what is it you do differently. Because if your close rate's 45% and mine is 17%, you're doing something different. But at the same time, that's why some of the things I listed there are so important. Because notice how some of that was also what leads you're working, what industries you're doing. Because sometimes who we think are the best are not. They might actually just have a better territory. They're just legit might be more ICP fits. They might be getting more inbounds. They may have a referral source that other people don't have. This actually helps me diagnose who's the best. So that's the things I'm looking for is performance. There's going to be some level of behavior that's causing the different performance. So here's my behavior bucket, and then here's my, I'll say, non-behavior bucket, the process and what they are working. I don't know if we have time to get into it, but I actually had to fire my number 1 rep at one of my orgs because of a studying greatness exercise. It was not me trying to find what was wrong. It was actually me trying to find what was right, and I couldn't. And that's what let me know something was wrong, right? So that was an example of studying greatness actually leading to us catching something where this rep was not 2 times better than everybody else. He was actually cheating the system. We had to let him go.
I want to point out a nuance in the way that Katie's studying greatness here. a lot of times, and even before this, we were talking about breaking things down in chronological order. And oftentimes the issue might be a lead targeting issue or a territory issue where the worst reps are targeting the wrong accounts, for example. But when it comes to something like close rate, Katie, you honed in on the call first right away. And the reason for that is you want to be a heat-seeking missile for what is the most likely sales activity to drive that metric, and then work to other parts of the call. So to your point earlier, if discovery sucks, it doesn't matter if the demo is good. It doesn't matter if they're good at negotiation or not, right? That's going to tell you a lot. And if discovery sucks, but those deals are still moving forward, that makes you wonder what's happening before that? What's happening before that discovery call to make all of these prospects the super easy lay down prospects? So try to find for connect rates, for example, you're looking at who they're calling. If you're looking at cold call conversion rates, you're looking at the actual cold calls themselves. Try to identify the lead sales activity that drives that lead metric. Start there and then work around to both sides.
Good story example too. I tell this one often. We had a rep at Patient Pop, Julia, who had a ACV that was like 36% higher than everybody else. 36%. So in my orgs, we do studying greatness every quarter. So every quarter, I assign a metric to a manager. It is your job to go find who the number one is with that metric. Tell me what they do differently if you can find it. So every quarter. So when Nick and I were talking about this earlier, this is how the wiggle gets updated, because we're constantly reviewing, right? So Julia had a higher ACV. It's like, I'm pretty sure it was 36% higher than everybody else. So I assigned it to Jess Strickland, one of my directors at the time, said, Julia, go tell me. 3 days later, he comes back and says, yo, I got it. She presents pricing as a package. Everyone else is presenting it as line items. This is how much these cost, here's your total. She was presenting it as a package. Here's everything you get. Here's what it costs. So what do you think we did with that? Well, we took it, we defined it. Here's what good looks like. We documented it, added it to the scorecard. We demonstrated it. We led trainings. And who do you think led the trainings, by the way? The rep. Julia helped lead these trainings, and then we deliberately practiced it. We brought up ACV by over 18% for the entire org. So did we get it to 30% like Julia? No. 18% increase across 50 reps. Y'all, we're talking about millions of dollars in ACV from a studying greatness exercise. And leaders listening, y'all know this. Who do reps like to learn from more? Their peers or from leadership? So you see what I did here? This works because Julia does it. This is how Julia's closing these big deals. Julia, can you help teach us how to do this? Julia, can you help us create the recipe and the what good looks like? This ain't me, y'all. This is Julia. Peer to peer. So that's the key to studying greatness, is it's also coming from the peers. So that's a good example. You can live the whole boat by knowing what the best do differently.
Let's dive into the specific rollout of this as an example, because I think it's a really good example of how you can roll out any metric improver, initiative, or whatever that might be. So you started, and the metric you were looking at was average contract value, right? You started there, and you figured out that Julia had the highest ACV. From there, you went into Julia's negotiation calls. Tell me, what were you looking for inside of those calls?
Actually, I want people to catch this. I didn't. Who did? I did. Jess did. This is also like leadership through levels. Jess went in. I simply assigned it. So Jess went in. But what you're listening for is the pattern. What are they doing on these calls? And so to your earlier point, what calls do you think he started with? We're talking about ACV. So what calls do you think he started with? Right? Starts with the biggest deals, but which call in the deal? Because there's multiple calls. Which call do you think they're focused on? The proposal call was where he focused first. And that's where he found the difference. What good looked like before was, it'll cost this, it'll cost this, it'll cost this. We'll waive this if you get started here. She wasn't doing that at all. It was the difference. It was the pattern. Because more often than not, we actually do know what reps aren't doing well. We don't know what the best are doing well. So it stands out like a sore thumb. right? Of, okay, damn it, I just let one slip, by the way. That was my first slip up in the last 10 minutes of a filler word. Now y'all can go back and catch it again. I almost made it. The key is there's something different and you'll notice it. You'll notice it very quickly because it's different. I can guarantee if I listen to some of y'all's calls, there's something glaringly different and I'll catch it very quickly. So that's what we're looking for, is the difference in the calls. If they're doing everything the same, then I know it's not the call. Something else is happening.
In both of these stories that you've told, why wouldn't you as the leader just go directly to the rep and be like, yo, what are you doing different?
They don't know. They don't know. They do not know. You ask a top performing rep what they do different, they say the same thing almost every single time. Either I don't know, I outwork everybody, or I make it more myself. I'm more natural. That's not it. That is not it. Funny enough, most top performers are not working 2 times harder than everybody else. They're just 3 times better. This is what frustrates a lot of leaders, is they look at their top performer, they're saying, well, Armand doesn't make all the calls and Nick doesn't do this, that, and the other. It's like, they don't have to. They're better. But I use that same language to my team. Why does Nick not have to make 70 calls? Because he's better than you. Get better like Nick. You don't have to make as many calls either. But asking a rep, they very rarely do they know. Very rarely do they actually know what they're doing differently, because they're just in it every single day.
From there, you go to documenting the greatness. So your manager, Jess, figures out whatever Julia was doing in these negotiations. What was she documenting? Are these example talk tracks in a slide deck? Is this something as simple as, hey, when you're presenting price, do this as one sentence? How do you actually make sure that this lives forever?
So it goes into our what good looks like for pricing. So we have one doc that says, here's what good looks like for pricing. And then we take that segment, we add it to our proposal scorecard. So when we're running or scoring calls, we have the scorecard there. And where a lot of people get call scorecards wrong is they use them for review. I use them for prep. The call scorecard is not to just review the calls. It's actually to prep for the call. All right, Armand, you have a proposal call coming up. Let's pull up the scorecard real quick. What are we trying to accomplish on this call? It's the prep that is actually the most valuable with the scorecard. It's not the review, because the review's already done. You already missed the call. It's the prep. So now that goes into our what good looks like on the scorecard for the calls. The rep can review it before the call. The managers, I work so hard to get my managers proactive. Armand, I see you got a disco call on Thursday. Let's get 10 minutes Thursday morning, jump on. We'll go through the scorecard together, prep for it, do a little scenario plan, and we'll be good to go. Not how did that call on Thursday go? You already missed it. So it goes into the scorecard, and then we're just reviewing it on a regular basis.
So I'm having a perspective shift here, because every time I've thought about a scorecard, it's been like, okay, call's done, deals won or lost, and we're looking backwards. And you just changed the way that I thought about this, which is actually we should be proactive, we should be looking forward. And I have to imagine that was a pretty big change you had to make with your managers to get them from going, all right, let's run your call through a scorecard and see how you did, to, okay, let's take a look at the scorecard before the assignment is due. Talk to me about how you implemented that change with your managers.
Really, the same way you implement any change to the rep, to the managers, is first of all explaining it. It's the wiggle. It's the same idea. What good looks like as a manager is being proactive. But then secondarily, that's my job as the leader to ask those types of questions. Most leaders are asking reactive questions. How did your team do? How did that call go? Whereas when we're having our one-on-ones, my questions are, what calls are coming up for your team? When I'm looking at your calendar, we're looking at your calendar moving forward, not moving back. The prep sheets are to get ready for the call, not to review the call. So it just changes the questions that I'm asking. Isn't that even a better way to lead? Managers like leading this way. it's more fun. It's more engaging. You're actually getting people ready for something. So the buy-in is always minimal. But the last point I'll talk about with all change, sell versus tell. Too often as leaders, we tell people what we want them to do. We don't sell them on what we want them to do. There's that everyone says your best rep doesn't make your best manager, and everyone gets fired up. They're like, yeah, they're totally different. I'm like, no, they're not. The problem is most great sellers stop selling when they become a manager. They are actually the same skill sets. Is that most managers and leaders stop selling. They stop applying the same skills that made them a great seller to their people. So you sell people on this. And by that, you unsell. Hey, Armand, how's it feel listening to these calls and hearing things missed after the fact?
Shit. Not good.
Is it working? Your reps are scoring these calls. Are they getting better? Are they actually getting better just scoring calls after the fact?
In theory, they should be fixing the mistake in the future, right?
Should be, but are they? Are they actually getting better? Do you think scoring calls afterwards is making them better?
I don't think scoring the calls is. I think sitting down and coaching them specifically on certain moments and pausing so it ingrains is.
So when do you think we should coach them, before or after the call?
Make sure that knowing what you've learned in past calls, going into the next call, you don't make the same mistake again.
So did you play sports at all growing up, Armand?
I was a wrestler.
You're a wrestler. Cool. Did you practice before the meet or after the meet?
Nick was a weird one. He would go for sprints after the meet, but I would usually be a more before kind of guy.
So maybe we should practice before these calls instead of after, right? So same idea. It's the same sales process. I'm unselling you on what we're doing now, painting a picture of what it could be and selling you on that. So that's the key, getting managers bought in. Is one, buy-in on this is, Nick, I cannot express to you, like, if people watch this on YouTube, I saw it. You're like, oh shit, you're right. This is not a hard sell. It's just making sure that I'm reinforcing it with my leaders.
You did two things for me as a leader. I was sitting there thinking about current state, how depressing it is to sit there and watch call recordings and check off boxes on a rubric to send it to a rep who just like glances at it, deletes it, and doesn't care. And then you sold me on the future state of, oh, wow, okay, the rep actually is now going into every call prepared and we're affecting our future performance, which I can actually affect. You did what a good salesperson does. You dragged me through the glass of like how painful it is where I am today, and you took me to where it could go. And now I'm ready to make that change. And that's what you're doing with your managers. That's why your change management is effective, because you are selling it.
This is actually what makes it easier to get practice done in your auras, because it's not practice, it's prep.
You feed two birds with one scone. Your practice is your prep for the call. All right, let's practice how you're going to kick off the agenda for this really big meeting. Let's get a couple reps, boom, boom. And now I'm not sitting here thinking this is a total and utter waste of time, because it's for that really big deal that I have next Thursday. And I'm prepping for the call, not doing two separate things, one of which I'm like, is this ever even going to come up again?
Katie, an amazing 6th episode, or however many times it's been. We have to ask you the final cue, and it stayed the same for all 6 episodes. We talked about a lot of good habits that sales leaders can exhibit. It's time to talk about a bad one. So what is one bad habit that all sales leaders should break so that every team out there gets a little bit better?
Most sales leaders are the bottleneck of their team, because what good looks like lives in their head. And then they wonder why their team is not more independent. They wonder why their teams don't take more ownership. They wonder why things don't get executed upon, because what good looks like is rattling around in between their ears. And as you have two sets of leaders, you have the ones that just never took the time to document it, or you have another set of leaders who think that's what makes them special. Because if I take it out of my head, I'm replaceable. That's the flaw, is get it out of your head, y'all. Y'all could walk into my org right now and coach my reps damn near as well as I can, because it's documented. Without knowing the product, without knowing the industry, you could waltz right in. So what do you think that does for my directors and my managers and my reps? I get asked all the time how I can do webinars and how I can do some consulting on the side. Is because I have a system that doesn't require me to be involved in every single thing. I'm like what we're recording right now. I am coaching calls right now while I'm on this call. You know why? Because the scorecard's been built. I am coaching right now. There are calls being worked on in my org right now with the scorecard that I help build while I'm on this call. That's scale. So the flaw is keeping it in your head and not getting it down on paper and being the bottleneck for your org.
Amazing. Katie, unbelievable show. And in a couple of weeks, you're running a session teaching people how to tear up 50 deals in under an hour. And so go check out that. It's in the show notes if you want more KD, or you can go check out the other 5 episodes he's been on. We'll also link those in the show notes. Everyone hang on for a 60-second recap coming up soon. Cheers. Alrighty, folks, it is time for a 2x2 recap email. Nick, what do you have for your 2?
So my first one was when you're working with a rep and trying to help them improve in their conversations with a prospect, work backwards. Start with what you are trying to get the prospect to say, and then build backwards what you need to ask or what you need to say to get them there. Number 2 was change your conversations with your reps from looking backwards, hey, how did that call last week go, to looking forwards. Hey, I saw you have a big proposal call with Acme next Wednesday. Let's talk about how we're going to go into that one. And what you can do now is your prep for that call can actually get married with your practice. If that call, the agenda is going to be really important to nail, you can actually practice with the rep a couple times how they will set the agenda for that call, which should get them more motivated because they are now practicing for a real prospect interaction that should mean commission for them if it goes well.
Number 3, run 1 study of greatness per manager per quarter. What that means is you pick 1 metric like win rate, you go figure out which rep is best at it, and then you start on the calls where they are most likely to demonstrate the behavior that makes them best in that metric. So for win rates, you might look at discovery calls, or for a high contract value, you might look at the proposal or the closing calls. And then number 4, from there, you use the 4 Ds to roll out change. Define what good looks like, document what good looks like, demonstrate it and make the rep run the training, and then last 4, deliver it in form of scorecards and other things that are integrated into your daily sales rhythms. Alrighty, Nick, how can people help us out here?
If you want to learn more from KD, 1, in the show notes, we've got links to all of his episodes on 30 NPC, but upcoming, we have a Kevin Dorsey, Armand Farouk special, how to tear through a pipe review. So if you want to learn from 2 of the best sales leaders that I've ever had the pleasure of learning from, Armand, you're included in that, believe it or not, despite how strange you can be sometimes and your pizza preferences. I highly recommend you check it out. There's a link in the show notes to register or get the recording if you're listening years in the future from today. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week.